or anything.
Oh, got it.
Okay. I'm Kathy Lang. This is March the 7th, 2003. We're in Harrison, Ohio. Betty Whitestein's on the camera. We're going to interview John Schottelkette. John, tell us where and when you were born.
Well, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, in St. Francis Hospital on Thanksgiving Day, the 27th of November, 1919.
And how did you come about being in the Marine Corps?
It's a long story, but I'll try to make it short. First of all, you have to get a little of my background to find out how I got there. Well, initially, when I was just a kid, teenager, 10, 12, 13, something like that, in grade school yet, our folks had a grocery store in Cheviot. At that time, why, it was right prior to World War II they had it. And I had one uncle that was in World War II, my Uncle Harry, and he brought all his equipment back from World War I, the gas mask and the cartridge belt and a 45 pistol and a few things. And they always, we were always playing, you know, cowboys and Indians, but anyway, we used to always take and try to get his equipment. In fact, we made a little underground camp right at the end of our street, Lavelle Avenue in Cheviot. It was all woods from the end of Lavelle all the way out there, and we used to go and build these little underground camps, we call them, put some trees across the hole, dig a hole and put some trees across it, and we'd take and go in there and put some sulfur tablets in there to try out his gas mask, you know. Not anything, crazy. But by the time I got into high school, well, by that time, why, my mother had her whole family was interested in music, and she wanted to be, in the worst way, to be a musician. She thought, we had one uncle that played with a symphony, and we used to go to the zoo operas and down to the symphony concerts when he was playing. So I was brought up in a music family in that direct. So I took but when at Western Hills High School, one of the fellows had an uncle that was a general in the Army, but in a medical group. And he used to be the head doctor in charge of the CMTC camp in Indianapolis. CMTC meaning Citizens Military Training Corps. And we had some people that were in college or other people that was in ROTC groups that went there and got credit and got paid for a 1-month session each year. The program there had went 4 years. So the summer camp, the end of the 4th year after taking other studies during the winter between camps, you could get a commission in the Army, a second lieutenant in the Army. So, Val, let's get to the point where I got in the Marines. Well, after this, one of our instructors, and I thought they were quite good, it was strictly infantry at the time up there. One of our instructors says, well, you think this is tough, well, you ought to try the Marines. Well, that kind of stuck with me, although you always seen some photos and pictures of the Marines in actions on board the ships and that. And so that interested me. And I took and I thought, well, maybe sometime. So when I got through with high school, I went to work for a tool and die company on Spring Grove Avenue. And I'll never forget, because it fell $16 a week. And if you, after 6 months, if we see you can handle the job, why, we'll take and double your salary. In 1930s, and that $35 a week, if you was single, you had pretty much money. That's hard to believe, but it's true. But anyway, I went down there, and I at the time, I'll never forget, the last job I done for them, I made a bid. We was an estimator for the company. They sent different companies, and they asked us to make 100,000 doors for a refrigerator panel, for Frigidaire, something like that. and we had to go down in the shop and calculate the man hours of work, material and so forth, and put it together for a bid to them people. And after 6 months, why, I was, the last bid I had was either $500,000 or $1 million for Frigidaire for a bid. And my boss at the time, Harry Richmond, Mr. Levi was a president. And so they said, well, we have to take it up with the board of directors, you know, and which was a whole bunch of baloney. But after 4 months of this, and he's just giving me the runaround, one day I said, heck with this, and I stayed on a streetcar and went down and seen the Marines. That's when I found out I couldn't leave tomorrow morning, you had to wait. That was in November, well, when I was 21 years old, that made me at 1940 on a thing. And so anyway, so then I talked to my dad, and he says, no way, you take and stick with that job or do something, but because he had the grocery, and I didn't want to be in the grocery business. I used to deliver a lot of groceries around Cheviot, Westwood, and everything, and I couldn't see that doing it when I come back. So anyway, I had right as soon as I was 21, I went down and signed up, and then right before they called me, when I told him that I had signed up for the Marines. So that's how I got in the Marine Corps. But anyway, so I had to wait there, and other than that trip to Indian Lake, that's the biggest body of water I've seen until I joined the Marine Corps. And when I went down to Paris Island, the first time I went out by the rifle range where you could see the ocean, it was a bay. Man, that was something to me. And it was March, and it was pretty cold up here yet. And we went down to Paris Island, South Carolina, is where their base is and boot camp. And they seen them palm trees going up to the base, and that was pretty good. Although the rest of the 6 weeks boot camp wasn't too good. I mean, the only thing I remember about that, the worst thing in the world is they get us out in the morning for they called it for troop calisthenics. And what they do is that damn sand fleas down at Paris Island are horrible. And so they march us back and forth and stir the darn sand fleas up. Then they take and bring us to attention and make us stand there at attention while them little sand fleas crawled up with your nose and your ears, and they'd bite, man, and around your neck. And they'd stand us there for about 15 minutes. And if anybody spotted a sand flea, we had another 10 minutes standing there. So that's when we decided in the platoon to take and establish a belt line. Anybody that caused us to take and stand there with them sand fleas, we'd line up and they'd have to run through the belt line, and we'd spot them on a buck. So you didn't do that, but I got scars to this day in the back of my head where them darn bugs bit me. And but anyway, it was to take and establish a discipline code. That's all it's for. They want you to come out there and say, it's time to go. You take that hill. That's what it's all about. Just discipline. The close order drill and everything else. And now they got even an additional thing. They have 3 days where they practically get no sleep, no food, no nothing at the end before they give them their Marine badge. That now you're a Marine, you know. That was unknown. So that's how I got in the Marine Corps. And so after a short, about 6 or 8 weeks at Paris Island, I went to Quantico, Virginia, because at that time the Marines before World War II never had any engineer companies. Nobody for water treatment, for refrigeration, mechanics on their trucks and that. I think they had that, but they started an engineering school in Quantico. But all of us, when out of boot camp, they asked us, now what would you like to do? Machine gunner, you know, and so on and so on. And initially I thought I'd like to be a machine gunner until I found out their average life in combat was about 6 minutes. And the only thing worse than that was a flamethrower guy. And he's got about a minute and a half. The minute he opens up with that flamethrower, everybody's in town shooting at him, you know. So anyway, we all put in for barrage balloon. Over in Europe at the time, for London to keep the planes up and away while they have all these balloons up in the air, so they have to come in pretty high and couldn't hit the targets good. So we put in for that, you know. Naturally, none of us got barrage balloon. I mean, I did. I got. At that time, they had Marines were experimenting with an alligator tank. They called it for going ashore in a thing that had 2 tracks on it. Get you up on a beach and you jump out instead of running a boat up on a beach that way. So I was in that, and we found out after we got there, both of them was laid up. They had run over a log and tore up the tracks. So they put me in refrigeration school, first class, field refrigeration. They had a box you could assemble, and then we put sandbags around it and so forth, and that's what I went to Midway on. And I got lucky there. That's my first break, because 6 of us went out there together to Pearl Harbor, and they took in, we were on a shipment for just the defense battalions at Wake Island or Midway Island, but they didn't specify which 3 went to Wake and which 3 went to Midway. And just because my name was Schottelkette, I was in the last 3, and I went to Midway. My other 3 buddies, they went to Wake. Of course, as you know, was captured during World War II by the Japanese. They spent their whole World War II as a prisoner of the Japanese, working in the mines in Japan. But one of them was from Cincinnati that I knew, and he managed to live through it. But he weighed about 80 pounds by the time they got him, and he's now dead. And a fellow named Batcha from Western Hills High School was with the civilian contractors on Wake. And they also, he got to be a prisoner of war too, although the Japanese killed half of the civilian workers on Wake when they captured the island. But he was lucky enough to take and live through it also and come back. And he was from Western Hills in Cincinnati. So I got lucky there. And but Pearl Harbor come along. This was in August. We went to Midway, and no Goonie birds there. They told us about them, but there wasn't none there at the present time. They migrated, and but anyway, we start. I was part of the group on the Eastern Island. That's a small island down at Midway Islands. The other one's Sand Island, where I think the Navy was still in charge. It was a naval air station the time we went out there. So there was a Navy commander was in charge. But we had a little Eastern Island, was where they was building the airfields on it, and all it had was some scabiole bushes, and it was only a mile long and a half-mile wide. And as it turns out, usually you had a 6 months tour of duty out there, and they sent you back before you went crazy. So anyway, I wound up putting 18 months on that island. Pearl Harbor come along there, and Mr. Roosevelt come out, or what Congress come one night and says, don't be surprised if Midway, Wake, and Guam fall, because we don't have the troops to take and send them to help them out. And so, boy, by the time Christmas come, we had to start, got to back up a little bit. We had our artillery gun positions and anti-aircraft gun positions all in place. We only had 1 battery of that. There was only 110 of us on this little island. So when December the 7th come along, we used to see a B-17 when they got the runway going, fly into the Philippines. They'd fly out to Hawaii, to Midway, Wake, Guam, and then down to the Philippines to, I forget the field down in the Philippines. But anyway, that's the way they got down to the Philippines with a B-17. So we'd get to see their crews all the time. And what bugged us most of the time, we wasn't allowed any cameras when we were on Midway. And all our letters were censored. And here these flyboys would come in, and they'd go all around the island taking pictures and everything else. because they wasn't under any restrictions, you know, in the 18 and 27 months I was over there, until I got back to Hawaii, I couldn't even send a picture home. And of course, there was no phone system. If there was a phone, we couldn't afford it. At $21 a month, why, and 30 cents an airmail letter with one sheet of onion skin paper is all you could write. So it was the mail was a welcome thing when the Clippers, China Clipper come in there, used to stop overnight, and I got on board one day, and I couldn't believe it. It was all velvet seats, and you talk about nice. The first China Clippers, a Pan American they had, but they had wound up a Japanese envoy that was supposed to come to Washington and tell us they wasn't going to start a war. Stopped at Midway, and unfortunately they had engine trouble, and he had to stay a couple of days. So we put on a dog and pony show for him. We'd keep running our troops up and down the same road, and everything. We only had, well, there was a total of 700, 110 on an island, but 600 on the main island. But when he come in there, they had every one of them lined up from where the dock was, all the way where their quarters was. Pan American Airways had a little hotel for the Clipper piece, but when they had to stay overnight, you know. But they got all these Marines that just lined them up, so it looked like, boy, we really had a lot of troops on that island, you know. But in any event, sooner or later, why, sure enough, here come the Goonie birds. We had one on the island, and we'd be going around the beach looking for shells. It's a fantastic place for seashells, and we used to make jewelry boxes, pay to glue them on and that, so something to do, because we only, before Pearl Harbor, we only had a half-day duty, and you had the rest of the day, you know, to do what you want, fish or go diving for fish. We took a piece of welding rod about yay big and took a piece of bamboo and hollowed it out and made a spear gun for taking and spearing fish. And there was so many fish in our lagoon here on this side of the reef that two fellas could go out, and within an hour they could take and spear enough fish to serve the whole gang 110 fish for a meal, and that was the best meal we had, was fresh fish, you know. Had to be a little careful because the sharks used to come through the holes in the reef, and we used to take and first we went out there with a tie string and then put the fish on a stringer. But we found out real quick them bloody fish on her attracted Mr. Shark. And one day I just went to go backwards, and he just took the whole bunch right, and that was the last. From then on, we still spared the fish, but we took a little inflatable raft with us. We threw all the fish in a raft so it wouldn't bleed, and because otherwise it'd chase you right up on that coral. And we wore our shoes out there on a thing, and because if you step on that coral and you hit a soft spot, and it happened to me, your foot goes through even with a high top shoe on, it cut right through the shoe and cut my ankle. And since it's a coral living thing, why, for 30 days you had a hell of a time taking and clearing that. We didn't have penicillin at that time to clear that cut up. So they were very tough on guys got their duty interrupted by too much sunburn or this and that, because they warned us about that. If you lose work on account of sunburn, it's 2 days and a break, bread and water. So we were a little careful on if you got sunburn, you couldn't walk around saying ooch and not chill. All right. So anyway, I participated there. The Japanese hit us, and we got a telex from Pearl Harbor. We had one fellow on 3 Army fellows on the island, Air Force fellows, that had a communications trailer. And every day at 7 o'clock they reported to Hickam Field for a communications check. And this one fellow, that one morning, we called him Sparks, he would come running out of the tent and telling us, this is Sunday now, where all of us are laying in a sack yet, because you don't have duties anymore. And he's running up and down and hollering the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, the 110 was just 2 rows of tents on a thing that we had for them people, these pyramid tents. And we had one captain that at that time was the highest ranked man on the island. Anyway, we took and told him, Sparks, go back to your trailer. One thing, you've been drinking that Aqua Velvet again, and you don't know what's going on. Aqua Velvet. Well, you couldn't get nothing to drink, that Aqua Velvet air power. Some of these guys was drinking that stuff. So anyway, finally, about 3 hours later, we got a communique from the other island on the thing. I think one of the inter-island boats that brought our supplies over. And then we found out that from Pearl Harbor they notified the Naval Command on Sand Island. But before they knew it, we knew it. We tried to take and communicate with the other island, and we couldn't at that time. And since it's Sunday, hardly anybody's up, and they were up with the old flashers and everything else trying to warn. But once we got the warning from then, that minute on, all 110 people were out in the gun positions, except what they call the service group, the communications boys. There was only 5 of us, 3 communicators, myself for the refrigeration and electrical section, and works with a galley. And then we got a Major Benson over from the other island, was then the commander, and we started taking in, getting the ammo supplies out to each gun, putting some barbed wire out. Well, we didn't have a time for barbed wire that day, but we got all that we could do until evening. And surprise, since there was only 6 of us in camp on a thing, they spread 3 of us out along the beach, along a mile-long beach. The next guy next to you, you know, it's so far up, you're all alone there in Scabby Old Bushes when the Japanese come out at 9 o'clock with 2 destroyers, and we thought they were cruisers at the time. It turned out they were destroyers. And they come around, and we could see them in the moonlight coming right down along the island, along the reef, and nothing was said, and all of a sudden they let loose. And boy, it wasn't 5 minutes, they had all our seaplanes in a hangar going up, and we had a searchlight on the end of our island, and we threw the searchlight on, and we got, after the other island had fired a number of rounds, I think our 5-inch batteries got 2 direct hits on the one destroyer, and the other island felt they got a couple hits waterline on the other destroyer. So they immediately took and threw a smoke screen up, backed on and got out of there. All they did in our island was they got one close enough to knock out our searchlight, which was by our 5-inch guns. And but that's all we had for the rest of the night. But it was enough to really shake things up. But I was out on a beach, and when they started firing, it looked like they were really, the shells, tracers coming 6 or 10 feet over here. They might have been 30 feet, but boy, they looked mighty big. And them tracers coming over trying to knock out our searchlights. Oh, yeah. And you out there all alone, and we thought, well, hell, they got enough men on one of them ships to come in and take our island. We didn't have, compared to what chaps had at Ewo or Tarawa, we didn't have any defenses hardly. So anyway, we got through that, and for about up until the Battle of Midway on June 4th, 3, 4, or 5, or I think it was the 4th, 5th, and 6th, they broke the Japanese code, and they found out that they was going to take and attack our island, and that's how they set a trap for them. And our planes were the first to spot their fleet there. We had, naturally, between the Pearl Harbor and the Battle of Midway, we put all sorts of defenses that we could think of in. And had a lot, they had some 7-inch guns in Hawaii. It hadn't been used since World War I. They brought from Guam out there. So we had about 6 on each island, put them in. But it's hard to camouflage something that's got a gun turret about the size of this room, and the only thing on the island is some scaly old bushes. You practically
can you come to the reference desk, please?
You practically make a target for us. But anyway, during the Battle of Midway, we were very fortunate. They did hit our command post, and they killed our Major Benson. It was an island commander. It was in the CP with us, and 4 of us got slammed into the wall right by the switchboard, and we woke up on a thing and found out it just just peeled all the skin off my one knee, and but other than that, why, we had one fellow in there, one of the boat operators. He had already broken a leg, and to put him someplace, they put him in a CP. And what the fellows tell me, we also had some slip trenches, an L-shaped trench that you take and go in if the planes are strafing and so forth for protection, just enough so you can lay down in them. And luckily we had him there, but this fellow here, when the bomb dropped on the thing, it broke his crutches, and he had a big cast on his leg. So we had about, I can't remember. I thought it was about the 30 yards. They tell me it was only about 20 yards. But anyway, I grabbed him and put him on my back and run him over to this slit trench while the Japs were making another pass to strafing us. And they said that was the fastest 100-yard dash they'd ever seen remade. But anyway, it did. I didn't get hurt bad, but when I went to the sick bay and they lifted that flap up and just threw the alcohol in it, it smarted quite a bit. But they sewed it up the flap around and put me something on a knee. But the other 2 fellows had that, and it's in my book, Midway book, there about several were wounded in the command post. Major Benson was killed, and he was the nicest guy because he had been an enlisted man, going up to Quantico and got these, but he wasn't the naval, nothing from the Navy's military academy. You know, you go Annapolis. I'm trying to think of the word, and there was a very social code in a service. The Annapolis and West Point people were quite snobs compared to any other type of a reserve captain or reserve. No, I'm USMC from Annapolis, you know, and they were quite good. They were good officers, but they didn't have to do any officers club. They practically had a white-black line between these Annapolis guys and the others. But as the war went along, there was a hell of a lot more reserve officers than there were the West Point or Annapolis boys that we had. Well, anyway, after the Battle of Midway, they had blown up our power plants, our mess halls. We didn't have anything left standing. That we needed help, so they sent us some Seabees out from Pearl Harbor. And on our island, I worked right with the Seabees, reestablishing a mess hall and refrigeration stuff. And I learned quite a bit from these Seabees because that's their life's tradesmen. And whether we knew it or not, you'd go to bed at night and you look out the next morning and there'd be a whole new building out there, where there's no prohibit on how many hours you work. And they found out when you get the job done, they could go back to Hawaii. Why? It's amazing how much, but they were really good craftsmen, all of them, and quite older than the rest of us on the things. But the Seabees, they got a rank right when they come in, but I think they were the best outfits in World War II. I really mean it. Every place, whether it was, I'll never forget, they wasn't on the island, I don't think, 2 days at Iwo. After we got through fighting and they were starting to land some planes that were, they figured we saved 5,000 airmen when we took Iwo that would have gone in a drink and dunked if they hadn't been able to land on Iwo and get repairs. But we asked, well, I don't know what kind of deal is that? 5,000 Marine killed to save 5,000 you flyboys. I'm not so sure we'd like them odds in the next one go around, you know. But anyway, so I went that when I remember it only rained one day. That's how I knew exactly what day I went on Ewo. It rained that night all night, but we're laying in a hole dug in the sand, and the water went right through. At least we didn't lay in a puddle all night because it felt cold compared to Guam. It's a little farther north, and with the rain and that, it felt cold. Besides, the Japs kept throwing them their mortars and everything else all night. That didn't help the matter either. But one of my highlights, you see the famous picture of the flag going up on Ewo. When that first flag went up, the little one that they put up first, that whole island just yelled and was so happy to see that at least that end of the island, we wasn't going to get fire from that end of the island anymore. And little did we know that most of the casualties were still to come, because by the third day, one of the outfits assigned, they had crossed the island completely and cut off that Suribachi, and they was able to take and get rid of the fire coming in from both directions. But in most outfits that went ashore, had 1 out of every 2 men was either killed or injured. So, I had a pioneer platoon with the outfit. The pioneer platoon was a platoon that helped them unload supplies on the beach and move up ammo to the troops on the lines. And I lost 2 men the minute the ramp went down on a thing, and we just got, they said, get ashore and just take and dig as soon as you get in, because by that time they had cut it in half. But they had the whole beach. The Japanese had already zeroed in all of their mortars, artillery, and everything else in every section of the beach. So when any of the landing boats come ashore, they didn't barely drop their ramp, and they had mortars, artillery laying right on them. If not there, they'd catch them before 30 yards out, and the boats had all drowned. And we had one night full of one of the LSTs. No, LST is a big LCTs. That's a smaller boat with a ramp on the front for boarding boat. It was full of wounded, and in a night, one of the supply boats took and run over it and sunk the whole boat with all the prisoners. And word gets around like that. And, but we had usually, once they got out to the hospital ship, 95% of them were saved if they got that far. But after that, we had it, well, they say an island is secured. When they said Ewo was secured, I think we lost 2,000 and 5,000 after they said it. That just means that we're certain the Japanese are not going to take and run us into the ocean and take the island back. That that's now our island. But like on Guam, 8 years after the war was over, they still find Japanese troops in the jungles over there on a thing that's, wouldn't believe that they got beaten, the war's over, you know. But anyway, so our outfit was mostly, I got switched from the Pioneer, broke up my Pioneer battalion, or platoon rather, that I was in charge of, and sent them up as replacements to different outfits. And when I got the word, I got sent up to the 3rd Engineer Battalion from the 3rd Division there. And our primary job was to take and blow these caves shut. When the Japanese wouldn't come out, we'd take and set charges in the top of the cave and take and bury them in that, or try to. And with all kinds, and we had also, if they were having trouble moving the tanks up and that, we had the job of probing the road for mines so they wouldn't look at night out in front of it. Fortunately, I never got on that detail that they're probing for mines in a road, but I was on details where they were blowing a cave shut. And we had, by that time, that's the end. By that time, they had approximately, the B-29s were already starting to land on Ewo that got in trouble. And we had a tent for them down right below our area where the pilots used to stay while they get their planes fixed. unfortunately, they was always digging around in the old caves and that, and getting casualties from getting souvenirs that they could pick up in a cave. But the one night, why the Japanese took the equivalent of a company, about 200 of them, and got down to the beach and come down to the area and come up from the beach and caught them sleeping and killed, I think, better than 20 pilots right in their sacks. And our third battalion went down and finally killed most of the Japs that had come up there. That was the last of the time they had really come up to fight, you know. So by the Army, though, was getting ready to take over the island from the Marines, and all the other, since we was the reserve, we were supposed to not even land on Iwo. We were the floating reserve, they called it, the 9th Marines and the 3rd Marines, and we had one regiment left back on Guam. But anyway, we had to stay there until the Air Force boys took and said that we had most of the caves closed and we'd get rid of them night raids that the Japs were doing. But we'd get a call at night where they snuck through the lines and killed some Army guy. But the first ones they brought in that night, it sounded like Coney Island, you know, with the fireworks. They were so, the first night on shore and up in the positions, all they'd have to do is hear a can rattle or a little pop up there, and the whole battalion would start firing. You'd think a big battle's going on, and they look out the next morning, and it was either a dog or they just threw a rock out for some cans, because in their barbed wire and that, they used to hang tin cans of that. So if you disturbed the barbed wire, it alerts you that they're trying to get through. But in any event, our one company from the 3rd Engineers was left behind. So when they run into one of these caves that they knew the Japs was in, they'd call us to take and blow them shut. Well, after about 2 or 3 weeks of this, they finally agreed, yeah, they got enough troops here to take care of that, and so on and so on. So we headed for the beach to go back to Guam with our outfit. And I made sure I was the last one to take and get on that boat, so I could say I was the last Marine to leave Iwo. Unfortunately, not. So it didn't matter what you ever get. There was no place on Iwo that wasn't the front lines for at least the first 2 or 3 weeks, because they were looking down our throats. But high ground all the way up to the north end, and Iwo was sitting there. Fortunately, they got rid of that. But when I got on there, I think I slept solid for 2.5 days before I woke up. One thing, it was that was the first night I really could mentally have a good night's sleep. One thing. We got back to Guam and got all new equipment and started training again for the invasion of Japan. We had our usual hikes and so forth, but the Seabees by that time had put roads all over Guam for everything. You know, it was like a city. You had a gas station, you had, well, our favorite pastime on Guam was stealing Jeeps from the Air Force and Army. And we had a rehab outfit where we'd get rid of all the other serial numbers on it, on the engine and everything else, put Marine serial numbers on it. So it wasn't, but very shortly, practically every NCO, every sergeant, platoon sergeant and Marines on Guam had his own Jeep. You know, before that, only officers got the Jeeps. We had Jeeps, and they stop us, they put up roadblocks around the island trying to find their Jeeps, you know? But they could never get the things to match. And we got a lot of good radio equipment. We had helicopters, we could get Tony on Japan out of the airplanes over the air bases that they wrecked and so forth. So we had tents with pretty screened-in pyramid tents. We had some showers we put up, and it was pretty good living on Guam. Although those 20-mile marches and the damn heat that was out there wasn't so good, but as long as you took salt tablets and kept changing your socks, et cetera, why, it was all right. But when you had, there was nothing hurt more in that training and that, when you got sweating so bad, and that sweat run down your pants, and you got all red, and then you got back to the base, and you popped water on that, in a shower on that rub spot. It wasn't long, I found out from the fellow, if you got a hold of some cornstarch and took and put it on your arms, any kind of powder like that to keep it dry, you could eliminate that. But we found the powders in that you get, just dust powders, really didn't work, but that cornstarch really worked. And then they finally got some, and they was passing them out in the galley when because we had people fall out on marches and that. And we had, towards the end there, the type of people we were getting were altogether different. It was some people near the end of the war there that had avoided it all the way through. And every one of them was supposedly a big shot in his factory at home. And I had two fellows in my platoon that had graduated from MIT and are PFCs in my platoon, see. But they wouldn't refuse to do things. They would just take and go far enough that they finally say, whether it's picking up butts or cleaning up or you name it, they would just do just enough to get on your nerves. You know, you can't. So it was kind of hard working with them people. And
sort of like working with your teenager.
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. You didn't know nothing, you know. I mean, but anyway, we got a break when they dropped the bombs. We were, like I say, it was low on that magazine. I got to tell us, we was loaded on board ship, ready to go for that invasion of Japan in November '45 when they dropped the A bombs, and we had to go back down the ships and unload our stuff off the stuff. The war ended, and there was a lot of just firing up in the air, and everybody was real happy when they finally surrendered. And but then when they had the problem, what do we do now on Guam? You know, with all these people. So they started all different kind of classes from these people. That this one fellow he was an electrical engineer, and he gave us a course on air conditioning. On up to the point where the last problem we had was a 13-story building in Chicago with an average daily temperature and the winds and so forth, so on. And we had to take and specify the amount of refrigeration needed for that and what type of installation, windows and so forth. That was pretty darn good stuff for being out of Guam. Unfortunately, though, right before they dropped the A-bomb, my enlistment come up. I had put 4 years in, and you had a choice of staying what they called at the convenience of the government, and you just hold your rank where it was, and you just keep your duties going until they let you out. I had enough points, boy. I'd have been the first one back in the States if I'd went that route. After 3 months, they said, "Well, if you ship over now, you get about 600 hours." And he says, you're just over here on 14 months, and there's a good chance you're going to be over here at least 2 more years. So I didn't believe that at first, but after a while I said, yeah. 2 weeks later they dropped the A-bomb. So all my buddies got to go back to the States, and they sent me to China. And after I had been there for about 2 months, I was in a sergeant major's office one day, and he said, I said, I just read this last all-nail out from the Navy. He says, oh, that ain't a new one. He says, that's been on our books for a while. I says, it says anybody that's been over here three out of the last 4 years is eligible to go back to the States. I says, practically every guy I come over here with has got that. He says, well, I thought when you come over here, the people on Guam had weeded you people out. When we got there, nobody checked to see if we got it. So it was about that time that the Chinese communists were taking over the countryside, and our outfit at that time was taking in running guards on the trains between Tientsin and Peking, which is now Beijing. And we used to go out at the little town called Tsingtao. It's on a map on a seashore that they can ship back to the States. But in the meantime, the communists would take all the country between Tsingtao and Peking and that. And they says, you know, there's a ship down there leaving back for the States next, I think it was 2 weeks. He says, if you guys are willing to try it, there's another one coming in 2 days. If you can get down there, you can even get on that one. And we told him, it was about, I don't know, in a 6-by, what they call the 6-by trucks, held, I don't know, about 25 people, depending upon how many seats. But anyway, we told him, you give us a couple 30 caliber machine guns on a thing, we'll get down to Tsingtao. Just write the orders out. And about halfway down there, we got one sniper that threw around at us, and everybody on that truck, along with the 2 machine guns, fired everything they had. We didn't hear any more bops at us all the way down. But it took us a long, long time to come back from China. I forget exactly. But we went up by almost a northern route in Alaska, and it was rougher than hell. And most of the time when we go to Chow, the old seas were running over the deck as we run up to go down to the Chow in it. So I think it took us about 30 days or something, a month to drive to get back to San Francisco. And first thing we see is some woman says, get your ass off of the ship. I got a date tonight, and I got to get back to Treasure Island by so-and-so. But we didn't know, we had heard about that. There was some women Marines. But I had never seen one before. There was a big old gal, and she said, get your ass in that truck. So we took on, went over to Treasure Island, and they processed us for a 30-day leave. And I gotta say, they really treated us royally, because there was a ferry that went from Treasure Island over to San Francisco where the trains left. And I forget whether it's the Capital or which one we got, but the very best train from San Francisco back to Cincinnati, to Chicago and then Cincinnati. And they took and held this train up for about 45 minutes. So the gang of us that was just coming back from overseas could get on that train to go back to Cincinnati. And it saved us practically a week to get to see our parents. So that was doing pretty good. And but then of course I went back. I skipped. I went to Midway, then I went to Guam, then I went to Iwo. But on the way back, when I was at Pearl Harbor, all my outfit was going to the States, including me, and they pulled me off at Pearl Harbor for additional duty at Marine Barracks. But you talk about mad, my outfit's going back to the States. Another break. They got back to the States. I spent 9 months in Hawaii, going down to Waikiki Beach, swimming every weekend. And they was back at Camp Lejeune training to go back out. And they got back out in time to go to Tarawa. So that I missed that dude by going back. And yeah, I got back to Guam and wound up with Iwo, but I had to go to Tarawa again and one other one before I got back. So I got in a way lucky again, you know. But you have no control over these things; they just happen. And so I got back to the States, and I had been going with my wife since we were in high school, and I had asked her to marry me, and I think it was while I was at Midway. I asked my folks to take and get me a ring and give it to her on Christmas or something, and that's how she got their engagement ring. My dad and mother.
Father-in-law.
Yeah, father-in-law. Go over and give her the ring. But we wrote pretty regularly, but most of the time we had a little code that we had numbered all the islands on when I come back the second time. I made a number of the islands so I could take and write her a letter and slip in a 1 or a 13 or something in some sentence to let her know where I was, you know. But other than that, why, all our letters were, somebody looked at them. And Major Benson, I sent one of them, I forget what it was, and she got it, and it looked like an old piano roll sheet with holes all over it. She couldn't even already tell what was in it. I don't remember what I said in that one, but it sure got, I must have said something about the island or something, or the Goonie birds or something like that. But Well, we got married, and I went down to Camp Lejeune, and my wife, though, her sister got married 3 or 4 months later, and I was madder than hell because I thought, man, I don't know when I'm going back out, come down here. And she waited until her sister got married and come down after Christmas. And we got a little, shared a house in Kinston, North Carolina. And I was at the Marine base at Lejeune, out at, not Cherry Point. It's where they practice all their landings down there. And it was about a 60-mile drive from Kinston to there. And we made it 6 days a week. One sergeant in the outfit, that was his old home. And so 5 of us shared the expenses, the gas expenses and so forth, to go back and forth. But I was just in the States about 6 months when they shipped me out again. And the only thing I was, that's the only time in the Marine Corps I really raised hell with a commanding officer. Because there was 2 of them, 2 sergeants in my outfit had never been overseas before. And here I was on the board going back over the second time. And them guys doing the same job were sitting right there, and I didn't think that was right. Mm-hmm. He says, well, what are they going to do when they're over there? Retrain them? You've already had the experience. That's why you're going. That's all, you know. So that's it. That happens once in a while. But we did get a Marine Commandant that was at Vandergrift, that was at Guadalcanal. And while I was there at Lejeune, he finally put out at Albany a letter that says, anybody that hasn't been overseas, you're going over before anybody on that base that's been there is going. And they finally weeded them all out and got them over there. They grumbled like hell, these quartermaster corps and all sorts of, that happens in every organization, you know. But that's it. And I wound up getting back. Went up to Lejeune. We had a little house. By that time, I raided quarters on a base. And I was there one day, and we got orders that the Navy or the whole service, the Marine Corps, had said, anybody that's got 1 year service in the Marine Corps is eligible to get out. Hell's fire. They had Marines on guard duty in the prisons up, because the Marines were all guard duty in the naval prisons around the country in Act East-West. And that was like a week after this order come out, they was eligible to get out. And that left all these here prisons with no. So I got the orders one day. We just come in and they says, there'll be no school today, Sergeant. Here's your orders. You're transferred to Hart's Island Naval Prison in New York. And I says, well, hell, how about the company? He says, you don't have time for that. You're going to get flown up from Cherry Point on a thing, and you'll get for the other part of your orders when you get there. And I talked the truck driver to going past our house, and I wrote a note on a rock. I wrote on a rock and tied it to the rock. And when we got to our house, I threw it up on our front porch. But I didn't get to see my wife. She got the note. I said, "I'll call you when I get to New York," you know. So 3 weeks later, I finally got a place up with a Marine I was in China with. Lived in right up within I forget, Whitestone, Long Island, and something like that. And you could just take the Whitestone Bridge, and I'd be over to take the ferry over to Hart's Island. And so anyway, we got with them, and I called her right away. But then she come up in a bus to New York. She was the only girl on a bus with 50 Marines. Christ, they treated her like the Queen of Sheba. She didn't buy it. But yeah, they really treated her nice. And then they was going up, not all the way, and she was having to take a train into New York City. I told her I'd meet her at the Grand Central Station, you know. Oh hell, that's like that has got so many gates and so many. It is huge, you know. Where in the hell do you? And no matter where I look, I give her she'd give me the train number, but I told her I'd meet her by the every station in World War II, railroad station had a spot where the servicemen could find out about when the trains come in and so forth and so on, information agency. And I just stood there because I found out from before, when you're looking for somebody in a crowd, they're just walking around.
Yeah.
Because you just keep walking around behind them. So if you at least stay in one spot, you got a chance. And finally, I think it was almost an hour and a half after the train got in. I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I look over, and she's on the other side. But we got together, and it turned out. And from there, we went to when my list was up. We went to Quantico, and then back to Cincinnati, and in an old Hupmobile we had bought up, and we're coming through the mountains, and the lights went out. Just about time it's getting dark. So I says, boy, let's just, Lord, give me enough light just to get out of these mountains. We got to Parkersburg, and they all shut the old gates right behind us on the road. And we stayed in Parkersburg that night, and they had a hell of a snowstorm in the mountains. But we got back with that old Hupmobile, and well, we was able to ride down to West Point, see that when we were up in New York. But then when I come back, why, I think I was only home 2 weeks, and I had the bed, but I couldn't. You just can't sit around. It didn't. So all I know is when we had a grocery store in Cheviot, we had an awful lot of people that worked for Procter & Gamble as our customers. And I thought, well, hell, if I'm going to work for somebody else and not go in the grocery business, that looks like a good outfit to work with. So I went down there, and right away, the guy that was hired was the next Marine, and I was in. He just, yeah. But so I wound up spending 35 years with Procter & Gamble in research and development. The first 10 years was in a soap synthetic group. We started some of the first Tide towers in St. Bernard, and later on I went out to Miami Valley Laboratories. We was the first group to be moved out there, and I was up there I think about 8 years, and then they bought the Charmin Paper Company, and it was transferred to paper, and that was something new for all our engineers. Don't matter what you're making, the engineers were all the same. You just had a different product to work with. And I didn't know somebody in the background had Pampers diapers as a backup they were looking at. We were strictly in tissue and toweling, the Charmin, but 2 other engineers and 3 of us technicians were the first ones to develop the Charmin paper. The Charmin toilet tissue that was really soft. And we were buying fabrics, synthetic fabrics and wires, and the felts from Europe, without being seamed together. Instead of making a big belt for the machine, we had about 20 girls at Linton Woods that we had taken and developed a seam for them wires where they'd poke through and make about a 3-inch seam that would hold them big felts together. That went on until we could train some people in the manufacturers in Europe, in Finland and Germany and that, how to seam these things together. It's like buying a roll of carpet, you have to make a belt out of it, So that was kind of interesting, and that's where I wound up having to make approximately 12 trips to Europe. One of the stops was in Frankfurt and below Stuttgart and Reutlingen, and our other main supplier was in Helsinki in Finland. Later on, we got one out of Stockholm. Well, there's a big lake there at the tip. I can't think of the name of it at this minute, but so that's how I wound up getting those various trips. I found out one thing when the boss says, at that time, why I had one of them cards that you could fly any place in the world. But luckily, we needed them anytime we got caught and had to go roundabout coming back from Stuttgart or Frankfurt and so forth. Why, at least we had a credit card. It was transportation. That was the only thing we used it for. but that didn't give us any cash, so we'd take and get cash from our own, from Procter and Gamble at the regular, there was, they traveled so many people, you just put in for a trip, and they'd give you the ticket, and the cash requested and so forth. But it just means that you were responsible for every nickel that they gave you. Your expense account was, we couldn't even buy a newspaper by law, by our expense account, or a magazine. That wasn't on the expense account. Now, don't get me wrong, we got magazines and papers and so forth and so on to find out what's going on. But it just went under food or some other thing, because we didn't have, until we just take and get, we didn't even have to have, we had just food and transportation and hotel bills, that's all. It was on the first, the first time I traveled for P&G, I'm trying to think of what it is, what we had to turn in, the expense account was a paper this size for a trip to Green Bay, that's all. Just, and your fare, you got your tickets, so all you had was your hotel bill and food, period. And so then we got a little bit bigger in a company, and then when it went about this big on a thing, then it tells you a little more detail what you could charge or could not charge, you know. And we had to take it when we went out with suppliers that sold us this, that. Why, it was all right for them to take and buy us a dinner, but we had to take and reciprocate the next time. That was a company policy. You don't let anybody take and pay your hotel bills and this and that. We pay our own way. Here it is. Then we're not obligated, you know. But that was in Europe. We didn't know it. In Europe,